Hi everyone, today I'm going to be teaching you how to create this silhouette painting using a watercolour background. It's a super easy beginner's tutorial. Below I'll attach all the materials needed, and let's get straight to it and create this lovely beginner's piece. So before I start working on the piece, I'm going to pre-mix all my colours. I've got a colour swatch sheet in front of me so I can remind myself what the paint looks like when it's all dried, and I'm going to be using the Windsor Newton 12-piece watercolour set for this. So as you can see, I'm mixing the intense blue to start with. This is a really bright, vibrant blue. It's really good for this kind of vibrant background we're looking for. And then for my second swatch, I'm going to use the intense blue again and mix in some crimson, and this will create a really nice deep purple. For my third colour swatch, again I'm mixing the intense blue with the crimson, but instead of adding more intense blue, I'll be adding more of the crimson this time to create more of a pinky purple, and this is going to really help with the transition of all the paint, as everything is at this point is really similar, all the colours that we've got down, and when they are blended all together it's going to create a really nice transitional sunset background. After doing this, I then put down some crimson, and after that I used the crimson and cadmium red, which is more of an orangey colour I would say, and I then mixed cadmium red and burnt sienna, which is a nice brown tone that really is going to darken up that orange that we add to the bottom of the painting. And these are all the colours that we're going to need for that lovely watercolour background. So now we're going to move on to actually putting these colours to the paper. I decided to use the wet in wet method for this piece. By this I mean I added a layer of water down before then going in with all the colour. And what this will do is help create a nice transition between all the paint. So after I put all the water down across the whole background, I then went in with the intense blue and added that first layer to the top of the piece. After adding the intense blue, I then worked in the intense blue mixed with the crimson, and I carried on this process going through all the colour swatches that we created to begin with, all the way down to the bottom of this piece. I tried to keep everything as natural looking as possible, so I used a more dotted effect when adding the paint down to keep everything really concise, but also not all the same colour. There are some areas that are lighter than others and some that are still darker. To keep up with this concise natural effect that I'm talking about, I frequently cleaned my brush, dried it with some kitchen roll, and then went into the piece and pulled out some of the colour. And what this does is it dries the piece if there's anywhere that's too wet and all blodging together, and it also means that you've got that mystical night scene, and it really helps tie that in to the whole of the watercolour piece. As you can see, I've added a few layers of the colour down. So once I got to the bottom with the orange, I then cleaned my brush and started from the top again, darkened up that blue all the way through with the purple and the pink, and went right down with the orange. The reason I did this was because I wanted it dark enough so that the white paint that I'll add on top really shows and pops out. So the darker the colour, the more you'll be able to see that white contrasting, and that night sky is just going to look a lot nicer. If the blending of these colours is proving difficult, I'd recommend maybe practicing beforehand on a scrap piece of paper, but I found the best way to do it was adding, for example, the blue at the top, the purple underneath, and pushing that back up into the blue. I then went further down the page and did this with the rest of the colours. So I pushed the pink up into the purple, the orange up into the pink, and vice versa as well. If you find it easier to pull the blue down into the purple and the purple down into the pink, that's also an option. I think as long as you've got that blend right, it doesn't really matter. So once I got all the colour down to the darkest shade I wanted it, I then waited an hour and let this dry completely, and after that I then went in with the white acrylic paint and began adding all these splatters. To add that starry scene into this part of the painting, I watered down the acrylic paint enough so that it could show up against the watercolour, but so that it was running enough to be flicked off the paintbrush. And then went in, dabbed some onto my paintbrush, and then started flicking it onto the page. The fun part about this part of the tutorial is it's free for all. You can do this for as long as you like, for as little as you like, until you get the effect that you're wanting. It's also really messy, so just be a little bit conscious that you might get paint around the rest of the paper onto maybe the table that you're working on, so just be conscious of that. But it's a really nice activity that you can have fun with and be as messy and as creative as you please. For this part of the tutorial, I held the paintbrush really close to the page to get the larger dots, and I lifted it away slightly to get the smaller, and this was a really good way to get a nice range in the size of each of the stars. I then waited for this to dry again and went in with some black acrylic paint to then paint in the silhouette. You can use felt tip pen for this or any other black medium. I just find that acrylic looks really smooth and consistent. So I really took my time to add in all this detail and painted in the people using the acrylic paint. And I also worked from right to left as I'm left-handed. So if you're right-handed, I'd recommend going the opposite direction to prevent any smudging of the paint into the watercolour, because once you've done this, you can't take it away. After finishing painting the ground with the black acrylic paint, I then went in to paint the tree. I waited till last to do this as it's the most detailed part of this drawing and there are so many fine details to put in. I really took my time to put in each individual branch, and I would recommend using a small fine tip pen if this is something that you really struggle with, as it can be quite difficult to control the acrylic paint, and like I said earlier, you really don't want to mess up at this final stage of the drawing. I wasn't completely fazed by my painting not being completely accurate to the reference photo, as I didn't really think this mattered so much because every tree is different and you're not going to notice if any of the branches are slightly off. So this can be quite a freeing part to the tutorial, just like the watercolour. I put branches mainly around the outside of the tree as I wanted this to be the most bushy like area, but really feel free to go all out with this, put branches wherever you feel like. Don't worry too much if you get anything in the wrong place. I used a 0.2 fine tip black pen to put in the really tiny branches. You don't have to do this if you're feeling confident with the acrylic paint. I just thought it was a faster way to really get in all the branches. As you can see, I'm working a lot faster when doing this, as you have a lot more control over the pen in comparison to the paint. And I used this to just put in the branches. I didn't use it to put in any leaves, just focused on the way the branches looked for now, and then built up on top of that using acrylic paint. You may also want to wait until the black acrylic paint has dried before doing this, just in case you smudge maybe the ground or even some of the branches that you've already put in with that black pen, as you don't want to ruin the piece so close to being finished. For the final part of this drawing, I made sure to use a big paintbrush and made sure it was dry. I then dabbed it into the black acrylic paint, dabbed it back onto the tissue to make sure there wasn't a lot of paint on the brush, and that gave the paint a really nice bristly effect. Then put this onto the tree to replicate leaves and put in a few smaller details with a smaller paintbrush, and that is all I did to finish this tree. I then took away the washi tape to reveal the nice crisp edge of the watercolour piece, and that is it. Thank you for painting along with me, and I hope you've enjoyed replicating this silhouette piece, and thank you so much for watching.